Bible here if anyone needs one. We're doing a whole chapter tonight. You'll wish you had one. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Called this series, Everything is Meaningless. Not. But Solomon pursues this book in this vein very much. Last week I tried to give an intro and explain what's going on in Ecclesiastes, but basically, being a scientist, I'm really enjoying this because what we have tonight in chapter 2 is Solomon does a great experiment. He's sharing the results of an experiment he's done on living. And Ecclesiastes is an interesting book because he shows us meaning and understanding by holding out to us everything that is meaningless. And that we can glean from that what God wants for us by looking at what doesn't accomplish what God desires for us. And so it's an unusual book. I can't think of another one, okay, quite like it. And then I was thinking about this today. Solomon, a king born with a silver spoon in his mouth, right? I mean, what do you say? I say Donald Trump inherited $200 million. What a success he is, And so I don't know. That helps to start. Solomon inherited Israel from King David, the greatest king they ever had, right? So he started. Well, I was thinking, how interesting. So then we're sort of looking at him struggle with having everything and not finding any meaning left. Then I got to thinking about Job. What an interesting. He's like the opposite. Solomon's born and he's given everything. And here's Job, a guy faithfully righteous and following the Lord. I mean, God even says, look at my servant Job. There's none like him on all the earth. And so God then takes everything away from Job. Everything of value. And Job still seeks the Lord and still finds beauty in faith, in trusting in God. And just makes some of the greatest quotes there ever are. So, interesting. So Solomon's sort of the opposite of Job. Now we met Solomon last week, the ultimate silver spoon guy, son of King David, spoken to by God, a witness to God's presence and power right before him, recipient of divine wisdom, wealth, and power, fantastically successful in everything he did. Yet later in life, he's seduced into not unbelief, but into the pursuit of many other gods in addition to Jehovah. And that horrible misdirection, instigated by the insidious effects of being, number one, all-powerful, incalculably wealthy, okay, safe from all the world's risks, and mistakenly coming to think it's all largely his doing. And so Solomon was wrong, okay, in that. And it led him to sin greatly. And we understand that. But I do think, I do sort of think that he reels in, he steps back from the precipice of damnation, and we get these sense, and tonight we get these sense where he still is trusting in God. But to understand, Ecclesiastes was written late in his life, so he's experienced a lot. He started hyper-religious, kind of lost it through his midlife crisis stuff goes on, and then he comes back, and I think this is his last wrestling match with God, and in the end, in chapter 12, we'll see that God wins. Okay, but we have an interesting night before us. Now, what really derailed Solomon seems to be a lot of it had to do with wives and concubines, and we're going to look at that. But he got lured away by many other things as well that we'll look at, in fact, which he shares with us in Ecclesiastes 2. So we're not going to miss anything. But here's the deal. Solomon's going to conduct a grand experiment for us that we need to pay attention to tonight. All right? He's doing an experiment for us on a scale that goes beyond anything we could ever test out. He's going to try to find pleasure and meaning and satisfaction in everything but God. Okay? And so, I don't know, some of us have testimonies, seasons in our life when we were apart from the Lord, and we were looking for satisfaction in a wide range of things. And you can have a season of life where it's just, I do it again, I'm still empty, I do it more, I'm still empty, I do it bigger, I'm still empty. And then finally we go, maybe it's God I need. Maybe it's God that can fill that missing thing, that missing piece in me. And so Solomon's going to use his wealth and his power, and we're going to see how quickly he realizes how meaningless just those things are. So he's going to test out all the things that mankind pursues for fulfillment. And we're going to look at them. They sort of fall under three categories tonight. And I call tonight the Great Experiment, Ecclesiastes 2. But he's going to look at the uselessness, okay, you can almost see that, of self. There we go. Okay. He's going to look at the uselessness. Now here's the deal. I could have used vanity again and again. That's the word he uses for meaninglessness, uselessness, something of purposelessness. He uses this word vanity. Vanity, vanity. But I've just used some different words. Could have used vanity in each three of these. But he's going to look at the uselessness of self-indulgence. He's then going to look at the futility of living wisely. And let's just say living by the wisdom of the world. Okay? Worldly wisdom. And then he's going to look at the pointlessness of toil. Maybe we'd call it workaholicism, or whatever that would be, okay? Just being a workaholic all the time, okay? So I think we're just going to get after it and get to chapter 2, and let's just look at verse 1. And it begins like this, looking at the uselessness of self-indulgence. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. So notice he says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this was vanity. There's that word, okay? It means all these other things I just shared. And verse 2 goes on, I said of laughter, it's mad, okay? And I said of pleasure, what use is it? Now, in verse 2, he gives us the results of his experiment right at the beginning. Now the rest of the chapter, we're getting to see what the experiment was, how he came to these conclusions, okay? But it's sort of like he's presenting the conclusion right there in the beginning. He said of laughter, he says it's mad. That mad is an interesting Hebrew word, but it means ridiculous, something to be mocked, senseless, foolish. He said just laughter, frivolity. He says it's mad, it's foolish. He said of pleasure, what use is it? Okay, and it goes on in verse 3. And he says, I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. Then he has this sort of in parens almost, my heart still guiding me with wisdom. And he goes on, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. So in verse 3 he says, now, so the experiment begins. And we considered the overview of this life experiment in chapter 1. The actual experiment launches here, though, in chapter 2. And here's what he says he's going to do. He says, I'm going to test pleasure, all right? I'm going to see what pleasure has. I'm going to just take pleasure to the max. I'm going all out. I'm going to saturate my life. I'm going to use all my resources, all my time, all my energy, all my creativity to consume as much pleasure as I can in every way conceivable. And so he begins to systematically throw the largest parties the world has ever seen. He's going to bring in comedians. He's going to have the best food. He's going to roll out barrels of wine. I mean, he's going to get after it 7 days a week for some extended period of time. We don't know how long. But there's something we got to be careful of here in this series as we go along tonight, and that is to compare ourselves to Solomon and to think that somehow Solomon didn't get after it to the extent we can. Here's the deal. Just forget that idea. He's got so much wealth. He's got so much resources. We can't scratch the scratch of pleasure that King Solomon was able to accomplish. So don't think that somehow he just missed it. If I had $1 million, he had the equivalent of billions of dollars. Okay? Your $1 million, he'd mock that. I spent $1 billion on pleasure. Are you kidding me? I've done things you haven't even ever thought of. So that's what he says. In Kings, to give you an idea, in 1 Kings chapter 4, we get a listing of what it took to throw one of his parties. And it's going to tell us what he needed just for one day. This is what he needed for one day of the parties he threw. And I'm just going to, you don't have to turn to chapter 4 of 1 Kings, but it's there if you're curious. Verse 22, it says, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour. All I can tell you is that 30 cores of flour is a little bit more than a 55-gallon drum. A big steel drum, you know, oil drums, about that high. So each day he'd use a drum of flour for the party. And he goes on and says, 60 cores of meal, so over about 2.5 drums of meal, some other grain, some sort of grain that's used in cooking. And then he says, then 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, so 20 cows. 20 cows. Think about that. Think how long we could eat. All of us in here could eat on one cow. I mean, we could come back probably for about a week on a cow, you know, by the time we divvied that all. 20 cows, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fat and fowl, okay, chickens, good old fat yard birds, okay, one day. Now, everywhere I do is, most of the commentators read, we're talking, that's food, you could feed something like 10,000 people every day on all of that food, okay, so every day he's doing that, day after day after day. So that little barbecue soiree, that little 2-kegger you've had in the past in your backyard, he'd go, ha! Please, give me a break. That's nothing, you know. I mean, look at that little bring your own meat thing you had at your house, you know. He'd just laugh at that. He'd laugh at that. Are you kidding? Man, I fed 10,000 people a day. Give me a break, you know. So he threw this epic series of parties night after night, night after night, night after night, night after night. And what did he find out in verse 2? He said of laughter, and I think, you know, that mindless party frivolity. I mean, listen, I've got a story. I got a testimony too. There was a time, you know, I remember parties and kegs and all that stuff, and it's like the next day, you don't even remember what happened, what got said, what you did, where did this tattoo come from, you know, whatever. These are not my jeans. I don't know, you know. And he said, I said of laughter, it's mad, it's pointless, and of pleasure, what use is it? Eventually he got tired of waking up with a killer headache in the back of a chariot, headed to Egypt with a new tattoo. He just said, I'm done with this, okay? This is a crazy way to live. I'm over that. And so now, he's gonna move on. Next, Solomon gets involved in all kinds of projects. Maybe he's growing up a little bit. Keep in mind, you know, you might think that this chapter 2 happened over a year. I would say it happened over 30 years. Okay, I would say he was party boy a pretty long time. Okay, but then he gets into sort of doing more kingly things, and he's hoping to discover, though, to get into these massive projects that it might reveal something to make life worth living. Is it better to be a workaholic than an alcoholic? We might look at it that way. Is it better to be a workaholic than an alcoholic? Let me give that a try. Look at verse 4. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. And I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Okay, stop. So Solomon starts leaving the party scene, probably still partying some, just not every night of the week. Okay, I need to make something of myself. He begins to build his house. Now, to give you the idea of the kind of house we're talking about here, it took Solomon 7 years to build the temple. It was one of the ancient wonders of the world. People literally would travel to Jerusalem to look on Solomon's temple. Okay, gold. I mean, they said it just, in the morning sun, it just glowed like it was solid gold from a distance because there was gold all over it. It took him 7 years to build the temple. It took him 14 years to build his house. Can you imagine what the palace must have been like? Twice as long. And not only does he build himself a house, you know, it says that he built houses for all his wives. All 700 wives. Think about that, okay? That's an event in itself. But we'll get more to that later on. So he builds homes, and here's what's happening here. There's some sense of pride and of permanence that occurs when we finally have our own home. Isn't there? Some of us in here, maybe many of us have reached the point in life where we're able to finally get out of the apartment life and finally buy a house. And although we call it our house, we know the bank owns it. But someday, if you live long enough, maybe you will actually. But it's still your house 24/7, and it's finally a little bit bigger, and you got a yard, and you can do your garden or whatever. And so he's going, I did that. Man, I did that in a big way. I think there's something that happens to the soul when you work outside all day and build something and accomplish something. When you do your yard and landscape. Opal and I love to get out in our yard and we'll fix up the flower beds. And I'm expecting the city garden club to come through and put yard of the month in my front yard. It's never happened. I don't think they even slowed down. They haven't even slowed down at our house. But even what we do, we look back and go, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good, you know. But here's the deal. So we do that. We do yard work. Here's what Solomon did. He planted forests. He never did it a little bit. It says he planted forests of trees. Okay? Yeah, I didn't plant a garden. I planted a forest. So he'd say to us, I like what you've done with the pansies and geraniums, but I planted a forest. Okay? Come check it out. And so he goes well beyond what any of us can ever comprehend. And in fact, it's interesting, if you go today to Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem, you find these. These are called the Pools of Solomon. Okay, I'm sorry, it's a little blurry there, but it looks like 3 Olympic swimming pools in a row, and they're believed to have originally been dug by Solomon as reservoirs of water that on all these hills there would have been covered in trees and stuff. They've all since been cut down, okay, in wars and all of that. But they said that those 3 ponds, now today they could have been added onto, I don't know, but they hold 75 million gallons of water. Now, maybe that's what they were back in the day, but he didn't mess around, okay, when he built stuff. So he needed that water for his parks and forests that he built. And so he moves on from the party scene, begins to build houses, begins to try to leave a legacy, begins to build gardens, build things that other people can enjoy, builds his wife houses, you know. In other words, he puts his hand to the plow and begins to work to make something of himself. Then he moves on from there to enjoy all that he built. So let's look at what's next. And once again, this is how life progresses usually, all right? Okay. So I think what we're going to see here, and I just, 1 John 2:16, we're going to see him sort of progress into this. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but it's from the world. Now, some of your translation may say the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eyes, and the pride of life. But we're going to see Solomon now delve into this sort of thing. Not of the Lord, of the world. Okay? So, verse 7. He says, so he's got all these houses. I mean, his wives have all these houses. He says, I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I got so many slaves, my slaves are having slaves. Okay? And so I have the children of my slaves taking care of me. Verse 7 goes on. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. Verse 8, I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women. Okay? And now we come to the desires of the lusts of the flesh. And many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So we leave the party scene and we go to the building scene. And now we've left the building scene and we go into the life of wealth and ease. I'm gonna see what it's like to just live the life of wealth and ease. Okay, and he's saying, dude, I got so many slaves. I got slaves that were born in my house. In other words, I don't do anything for myself anymore. I don't do anything. I have slaves do everything for me now. I'm just living the easy life. I don't cook my food. I don't wash myself. I don't dress myself. I've got slaves that do all of that. Pedicures, facials, massages. I do it all. I get it all done. I look out the window and I survey my domain. I've got cattle and sheep ranches to the horizon now. I read in the first case, he had 40,000 horses. 40,000 horses. Okay, money and wealth, forget it. Silver and gold, the treasure of kings and provinces. Silver, it says in 1 Kings that silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem in King Solomon's day. If you've ever been to Israel, there's a lot of stones. It's a stony place. And silver, it says, was more common than stones. So it's the kind of wealth we don't see today, I don't think. And not only that, he gets into what he's infamous for, right? He gets into women. 700 wives. I don't know how he did it, to be honest. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines at his beck and call. So Solomon experienced in his life uninhibited sexuality. He made Hugh Hefner look like a rookie If you would have brought up the Playboy Mansion to him and Hugh's 6 little blonde girlfriends, Solomon would have gone, ha, 6! I married 6 last week. Are you kidding me? That's nothing. You know? And so, you know, I mean, this is a man who had uninhibited sexual experience. He just did. And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. After all of this, all his experiments, he's going to begin to talk about the experiences of the party scene. And so we've seen that of the acquisition scene. And then in the end here, just outright the hedonistic scene. Those are sort of the sequence we've gone through. Party to just acquiring and the acquisition of stuff. Then just hedonism and pleasure. And so now we, though, come to the pride of life in verse 9. He says, so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Guess there's no arguing that. Also, my wisdom remained with me. Now, we've seen that twice. This is the second time. It sounds like he has no wisdom. Okay? But we remember one of the things about Solomon is that when he was made king, God asked him, what can I give you? And he was expecting a young guy to say wealth and, I don't know, wives and horses and whatever. And he said, I want wisdom and knowledge, Lord. That's what he said. And so God was so blown away that that's what Solomon asked for. He gave him wisdom and knowledge and wealth and success and all of that as well. And so I think we have to understand this, that he's going through this, but yet somehow he's doing it yet with the wisdom of God directing him so that the lesson can be learned that needs to be learned, even though it's not something God tells us to do. So it's the idea, he's aware of God's wisdom, but what he's doing isn't godly wisdom, but God's got a purpose in it. In fact, I don't know, was God sort of directing him to do this? Because Ecclesiastes is a really unique book to teach us some lessons of life that aren't taught this way anywhere else. And so it's hard to know. But it seems like he's saying, I didn't go into this blind and just forgot everything. You know, maybe he's thinking, I never forgot what I was doing. I never got so caught up and so lost in seeking pleasure that I forgot that what my goal was from the beginning, to see if there was really anything of value in these endeavors. And here's the deal. We're blessed by the results of his experiment, because we don't have to waste parts of our lives doing what Solomon did, thinking we're going to get a different outcome. Okay? So he never forgot this was an experiment from day one. So maybe you're thinking about experimenting yourself because, you know, I just want to see if there's anything good out there. Well, you've got a problem. And here's the deal. God's done this now. We have the book of Ecclesiastes. If you do what Solomon did now, that's sin. That's sin if you're a follower of Christ, if you're a Christian. You know, because it's all been done. There is no experiment for you. God's preserved it in the book of Ecclesiastes for us. You know? Well, anyway, we're going to move on. Verse 10. We're going to look at, he's going to deal now with the desire of the eyes. Verse 10. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And this was my reward for all my toil. And so he says, what did I get out of it? Pleasure, momentary, fleeting there for a second, but then gone. So if you live a life for pleasure alone, enjoyment will decrease. And this is sort of like if anyone's familiar with addiction or you've known anyone in addiction, if you live for pleasure, enjoyment will gradually decrease in whatever it is you're doing unless you raise the intensity of the pleasure. This is what happens. What's pleasurable at the beginning ceases to have the effect. So you've got to raise the intensity to get the same effect. We understand that, right? But you reach a point of diminishing returns when there is little or no enjoyment at all, and then you're stuck in only bondage. That's what addiction is. For example, the more people drink, the less enjoyment they get out of it. This means they have to drink more and stronger drinks in order to have some sort of pleasure. What's the sad result of that? You have this desire for it, but it gives you no satisfaction. And then you have it could be a heroin addict, it could be a pain pill addict or whatever. And every one of their stories is, I'm just a slave to this addiction now, and I don't get satisfaction except for a moment, and then it's gone. You know. Instead of alcohol, you could substitute drugs, gambling, sex, money, fame, any other pursuit. The principle is going to hold true. When pleasure alone is the center of life, the result will ultimately be disappointment and emptiness. Because pleasure alone can't satisfy. Okay? Verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity. So he's looking at all this stuff. All was vanity, and a striving after wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. And again, if you weren't here last week, under the sun means that he's only looking, not from a godly or heavenly perspective, but from a worldly perspective. You know? And all the stuff I had done, everything we've talked about tonight, it was all vanity. And striving after wind. I was thinking today, I like to use this analogy, it's like nailing Jell-O, trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. You get out your bowl of Jell-O, you put it on there, you know, you can't nail Jell-O to the wall, right? And you can't catch wind. You can strive after it, but you can't. So seeking pleasure and hedonism and success, it all became redundant, joyless, repetitive, boring, forests and gardens, boring, giant houses and ranches, boring. And that guy was thinking, you know, I don't know if there's anything that can make you richer faster without the wisdom to deal with it than maybe, I don't know, I'll just say hip-hop music, okay? You know, rappers or something. These kids come out of the ghetto and they start making millions of dollars. And they just start living a Solomon-like life, you know, but they're not finding satisfaction in that. I think of just all the wealthy businessmen. I think of all the musicians that have committed suicide. I think of, you know, all the comedians that are like at the top of their game and they just go in a motel room on Hollywood Boulevard and overdose on heroin. And how tragic! They have everything. They've got money. They have bank accounts we can only imagine. So it doesn't satisfy. So nothing's changed. You don't need to try that experiment. He tries it with women. One woman doesn't satisfy. So he goes for another and another and another. Imagine 1,000. I mean, Solomon didn't want for shape or eye color or hair color or personality. He ran out of fantasies. So you track with him. I mean, anything else he could think on his head, he had done. Anything you could imagine, he had done. In that vein. So he plays it all out. In the end, he's done everything there is to do. So that brings us on to verse 12, sort of our second heading. So we looked at the uselessness of self-indulgence. Now we're looking at the futility of just living wisely, chasing after the wisdom of the world, being a philosopher, I guess. Verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? So what can the guy who comes after me do? He can't top anything I've just done. I wonder if he could top me in wisdom or some of these other things. Only what, you know, so what can the man who comes after the king do? Only what's already been done. He's not going to be able to dream up anything new that I haven't done. So God, through Solomon's life, is telling us right here there's no fulfillment in this sort of pursuit. It's a dead end. And you're going to waste your life looking for joy and happiness and peace this way. Verse 13. Then I saw that there's more gain in wisdom than folly. Whew! Solomon, thank goodness. You finally discovered something useful here. Okay? But he's talking about even in just worldly wisdom, there's more gain in wisdom than folly. So he sees there's reasonable benefit to wisdom over foolishness. As there's more gain in light than in darkness. We can get more done in the light than in darkness. Verse 14, the wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet, I perceive, so it's interesting, he's going, I'm walking in wisdom, and the fool is like stumbling in darkness, but then he makes this discovery. I perceive that the same event happens to all of them, wise or fool. And he doesn't say it here, but what he means is death. The wise live wisely, but they still die. And the fool lives foolishly, and they die too. Okay? And in verse 15 he says, and then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool is going to happen to me also, as wise as I am, is the idea. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this is also vanity. And so, like I said, we think Solomon might have been borderline depressed, He might have had a depression issue. We don't know. But he's going, listen, as wise as I am, I'm going to die just like the fool. What's the point? Why memorize all of Confucius's sayings? Well, I memorized everything Buddha said. I'm just going to die. I'm just going to die like the fool that doesn't even know where his next meal's coming from. Death's the great equalizer, isn't it? It's like no matter how high you ascend in life, everyone ends up 6 feet under. Same place. Just the wise and the wealthy fall much further. Verse 16. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. It is true, man. Life goes on. You may be a big deal in your day, but once you die, Bible, look, how many of you can name your great-great-grandfather? Not your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather. Some of you might be able to, okay, but the point is 80% or 90% of people cannot. And so what does that tell you? In a couple of generations, you're forgotten by your own family, unless you have a family Bible. So what becomes of us as far as the world? Well, you know, the world marches on, and you know what? Unless you build a monument to yourself, the world's not going to remember you, no matter how wise you were or whatever. Maybe books will go for a while, but then how many people want to read a 100-year-old book? I want the book that came out last year on this topic, you know? And it's sort of interesting how life does that to us, right? And so that's all he's trying to say. Verse 17, so I hated life because what is under the sun, okay, worldly wisdom was grievous to me. All is vanity, all is uselessness, meaninglessness, and a striving after wind. So he says, I hated life. I don't think he was contemplating suicide. You know, death, through Ecclesiastes, death is something he wants to avoid, actually. So he's not going sort of suicidal on us here at all. It's interesting, Voltaire was a French humanist back in the 1700s, I think, and he said, I hate life and yet I'm afraid to die. You know, that's a tragic way to live, isn't it? I hate living, but I'm afraid to die. You know, what do? You know? I think Solomon was sort of saying something like that. Life can seem irrational and futile, you know. It seems to perhaps been to Solomon in some level. I think what he was saying, though, was just this. I'm disgusted with life. I'm disgusted with worldly life, just what's there. And, of course, I'll just add, apart from some sort of a relationship with God. We don't know who gives meaning to life, okay? But he's saying, but how many people out here? How many people out there right now? The car's going down A1A. Have no connection with God at all. And they're looking for meaning and all the things Solomon tried to find meaning in. And how many of them, you know, if you have friends at work and people you have when they let their hair down a little bit and want to talk to you, how many of them going, is this really all there is to life? It's true. It's true. If you're going to just get stuck in this plane, it's not pretty. You're going to hate life even though you're afraid to die. Now, a healthy Christian believer never would hate life, no matter how difficult the circumstances can be. It's interesting, though, some of the great men in Scripture asked God to kill them. Now, they didn't say, I'm going to kill myself. They say, Lord, just take me. How about like Job at one point? Moses, Elijah, and Jonah all asked God, just kill me. I'm done. I can't make anything out of this stuff. Just right now, lightning bolt. I'm done. I'm out of here. You know, God never did that. And they all came back. They finally all changed their minds, okay, and ended well. But you know what? To the contrary, the Christian, we should love life, seeking to put the most into it and get the most out of it because we want to do it to the glory of God, right? And when we bless the Lord, we will reap what we sow. When you sow blessings into the kingdom of God, you will return. You will harvest blessings back in return, okay? And we may not enjoy everything in life or be able to explain everything about life, but that's not the most important thing. We, as Christians, we live by promises and not explanations. And we know that our labor is not in vain in the Lord. Just a couple of scriptures came to my mind as I was thinking about this. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. And that means our life too. I don't think it just means if you're doing church work. But listen, if you're laboring, and in Ephesians, I think Paul gets that idea there too, that even we're at work, wherever we get paid, okay? Wherever we get paid. He's writing to the Ephesians. He's actually talking to wealthy people. He says, he's talking to slaves, but in Ephesians 6 and verse 5 it says, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ. Okay? Not by the way of eye service or as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord. So that even at work, Paul is saying, wherever you work, now thankfully we're not slaves, okay? We might have bad bosses, and it may seem like that some days. But we're to work under the Lord every day. Go in there. We're to do it with a joy, and people should maybe see a difference in us. And that's because the Lord is in what we're doing. We understand that. Now, another interesting thing, and it's what we'll finish up on tonight, is that Solomon came to really be disgusted with this fact that you work hard all your life. And look, he accomplished a lot, didn't he? He built all this stuff, and he realized, I'm going to die and give it to someone who did nothing. Okay? And he's going, that doesn't seem fair to me. I worked so hard for this, and I'm going to die and just give it to my son who's done nothing but be born and breathe. Okay? So that's what our last little section's on. The pointlessness of toil. Pointlessness of toil. Verse 18, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool. He's talking about his son, by the way. Okay? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. This is crazy. Okay? Now it's interesting, in fact, that Solomon inherited much from his own father David, so it's sort of funny he would make this argument, but he certainly added to what David had. So he has a sense of this, though. He multiplied much. And so in life, Solomon will end up leaving his vast wealth to a son named Jeroboam. Now, imagine that he had 700 wives, and you think that out of that, he'd get one really killer dude, one really awesome, God-loving son, smart beyond belief, whatever, great leader. He gets Jeroboam, who in fact ends up being a fool. Okay? And in fact, he's such a fool that after Solomon dies, Jeroboam takes over. He's young. He ignores the wisdom of the elders, and he listens to all the young princes, and he ends up creating a civil war in Israel, and Israel gets divided in half, and he loses 10 of the 12 tribes, become their own kingdom. That's how foolish he was. So Solomon had built this incredible kingdom. His son, in a short order of time, virtually loses it all in wisdom. So anyway, verse 20, that's sort of what happened, a little background. Verse 20. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. So he's late in life now, looking at this life of labor. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. 22. What is a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. If you ever know, I've known some business people, and I've read biographies of some that, they can be hugely successful, but it's like they hit the bed at night. They can't, their mind won't turn off. And it's like they just lay there and they're thinking about all the things and how to keep this giant business conglomeration going, and thinking of the attacks in the business world, if you will. I mean, I guess, and people in government, kings and leaders and dictators have the same. It's almost like a paranoia, isn't it? And he's going, and we do all this work and leave the wealth that somebody didn't work for. Is that fair? We spend our days of sleepless nights. But anyway, he starts to, he's going to give us a conclusion, though, and it's actually a good conclusion now from this great experiment. And it begins in verse 24. And he says this: there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, apart from God, who can eat or who can have enjoyment. Verse 26, for the one who pleases him, the one who pleases God, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This is also vanity and a striving after wind. So there's a suggestion there that even people that don't know God and acquire much, ultimately God's going to take it from them and give it to the righteous. And in some ways, also just in Calvary chapels, I've heard of Calvary chapels they get given a strip center. They're wondering, what are we going to do? Our lease is up, and then the church prays, and they get, they've made an offer on this place where they're at. Then all of a sudden, the owners change their mind. Listen, something terrible's happened. It's better for us to give this to you as a tax write-off. So here, it's yours. So I'm praying big time that this place could be all ours, Lord. Come on, we got to pray for that, right? That would be awesome. But Solomon, and he's not advocating eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's fatalism, not faith. But he's saying if you have that relationship with God, then there is going to be joy and satisfaction in the things we do, right? So he says, thank God for what you do and enjoy it to the glory of God. Paul gave his approval to this sort of idea. In 1 Timothy 6:17, he says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Don't depend on your wealth, okay? We want to seek to please the Lord. Well, God wants to give us wisdom and knowledge and joy, and those gifts allow us to appreciate all the other blessings, right? So possessing things, that's not it, okay? Sinners can heap up all kinds of riches but never find joy. Apart from God, there can be no true enjoyment of blessings, right? Now, this completes sort of the first section of Ecclesiastes, and Solomon sort of declared the problem and expounded on it a little bit. He sort of presented 4 arguments through chapter 1 and 2. Now, chapter 1 is a little about the monotony of life. Then the vanity of just wisdom alone, the futility of wealth, the certainty of death. We covered those things tonight. He looks at everything from under the sun from a human point of view. But when you bring God into the picture, everything changes. Most of what we've read from the middle of chapter 1 almost to the end of chapter 2, God was never mentioned. So everything he was talking about was looking at this experiment was apart from God, what's life like? So Solomon wants to provide us with some theology. So I like verse 26. It says, for the one who pleases him, God will bless. So God wants to bless those who please him. What pleases God? What is it that pleases God? It's not a trick question. It's faith. Faith pleases God. That's all he desires of us. He doesn't expect extraordinary exploits of Christian, work or evangelism, just faith. Then I'll be in your heart. If you believe in me, you have faith, I'll be in you, and I'll see that the Holy Spirit guides you into the works I want you to do in my kingdom. I just need faith from you, okay? I remember the Apostle Paul, said in Philippians 4, listen, I've been homeless and I've had mansions. And you know what? Both were okay with me because I had Christ. He said, I've been fed, and there's been days when I've been really hungry. And both are okay. I can be satisfied. I've learned to be content in any and every situation because Christ is enough for me, And that's not an easy lesson to learn, but it is true. Our boy Job had everything taken from him, tears his clothes and says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked shall I return. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I've had a lot, now I've got nothing. God's still good. I love his wife. She said, well, just curse God and die. Thanks, honey. Yeah, having a bad day already. Didn't need that little tidbit from you. But she didn't understand his faith, But in the end, she comes around and their family gets blessed again. Now, here's how I'm going to wrap this all up. Now, in Ecclesiastes 3:11, we'll look at that next time, it says that God has placed eternity in our hearts. That's an interesting phrase. God has placed eternity in our hearts. And here's what I want to try. I hope you can come with me here. I think that at some level, in the deepest parts of our souls somehow remember how it was before the fall. Somehow we remember how it was for Adam and Eve before they sinned. How incredible and fulfilling life was. I think that somehow we have a sense of that, and that's why we have an urge. We're always looking for something before we find Christ. Okay? So I like to think like maybe the soul had this, when Adam and Eve sinned, this great gouge was gashed in their soul. Okay? And so there's something missing. The soul remembered eternity, but now there's this missing void. And we go through life now, we're trying to find things to patch that up, like spackle on a nail hole in the wall so that it's much bigger, or filler on our driveway or something. But we're trying to fill things in this groove that's been torn in our soul by the fall. And our soul, the Word says our soul is groaning. In fact, the Word says the whole creation is groaning for the return of Christ, because what? When Christ returns, He's going to make the world like it was. And so maybe that's the groaning. We feel that tear in us, right? And it's never. And so we try to throw stuff. We try to throw temporary pleasure into a gash, into a groove that requires eternity. And we're trying to fill it with temporary, and it wants something eternal. Okay, are you still with me? I hope this is too. I just love this. I love this. But that junk can never take the place of that. Now, Solomon got to the end of his goals and said, all this stuff, it doesn't fill my groove that's torn in my soul, that's looking for eternity in it. Now, my favorite story in the Bible, I'm going to finish just with this idea, is Jesus. One of my favorite stories. I got a bunch, but Jesus at the well with the woman in Samaria. I love this story. Okay, he sits down at the well, and this gal, a woman of ill repute, she shows up, and he's thirsty, and he needs some water. And so he sits down, he begins talking with her, and she's currently, at the time of the story, exchanging sex for rent. She shows up in the middle of the day. Most women would come and get water in the morning. She's probably showing up in the middle of the day because she's probably going to get beat up by the wives and all in the village. So she comes out, so she's alone. An outcast, she shows up. And Jesus says, hey, will you give me a drink of water? And she scoops some water, and she's kind of freaked out that he would even talk to her. A woman and a Samaritan on top of that. He was obviously a Jew. And so she hands him water. He takes a drink. And he says this, I'm going to drink this, but I'm going to get thirsty again. And she's like, you want another cup? And he goes, no, I'm paraphrasing heavily, by the way, folks. So do you want another cup? And he starts talking to her about water. He says, people are going to come to this well all day long. They're going to need more water. It's not going to satisfy them. In fact, the same woman that were here this morning drawing water, they're going to be back tomorrow. And then he says this, listen, if you drink the water that I have to offer you, you're never going to be thirsty again. You're never going to thirst again. And she misses the idea. And she's looking at him, and she's going like, you don't even have a cup. I mean, this is a deep well. You don't have a pail and a rope or nothing. What are you talking about? He says, listen, basically here's what he ends up conveying to her. He says, I am eternal. You've had all these men. It says, you've had 5, 6, 7 husbands, and you're not married to the man you're with now. He says, what I have is eternal. I can fill your groove. I can fill your gash. I've always been, I am, and I will always be. And when you put me in that void in your soul, you're finally putting eternity into eternity, the eternity that's in our heart. And that's going to be satisfying, right? Does that make sense? I fill the groove. I fill the eternity. David called me Lord. I'm eternal. Come to me and never be thirsty again. So here's the bottom line. In the end, there's nothing under the sun that brings lasting fulfillment, no matter your circumstances, except Jesus Christ. He's the only eternal painter's putty. That's a terrible analogy, Lord. I'm sorry. That can fill the crack and leave it beautiful, like it originally was. Okay? But you have to look beyond the sun. Solomon kept saying, I've been looking under the sun, and I can't find anything here. When we lift our gaze above the sun, we finally find what it is we need to fill our lives. And no matter what the circumstances are, we can still have a fulfilling life. You've got to fill your group with the eternal. So the invitation from Jesus is simply this: come and thirst no more. Amen?
Amen.